Welcome everyone to today's Explainer. We are going to explore a really fascinating and honestly absolutely crucial intersection between corporate strategy, risk management, and organizational culture. But, we aren't just going to look at dry spreadsheets or compliance manuals. No way. We're actually going to uncover the surprising biological barriers literally hardwired into our brains that prevent us from seeing threats, and more importantly, how the most successful companies out there manage to overcome them.
So let's dive right into this with a pretty simple premise. A company's true maturity, it's measured by its ability to see the fire before it even starts. Think about it. It's super easy to just put out a fire once it's blazing and destroying things, right? But the real hallmark of a sophisticated organization is anticipating that tiny spark while it's still just a possibility.
And that means we really have to ask ourselves, is our organization's risk management acting as a proactive shield? Or has it just kind of devolved into a reactive, bureaucratic chore? Because so many companies operate purely in this reactive state. They're constantly just scrambling, but only after a risk has already materialized into a full-blown crisis.
Okay, here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're covering risk maturity, the optimism trap, integrating risk and strategy, organization-wide culture, and finally, investment in business quality. Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, risk maturity, and how business risk systems actually evolve over time. Well, in the early stages, like in a brand new startup, risk management is usually super informal. It's maybe just the founders chatting over lunch with absolutely zero dedicated resources. Then you step up to newly regulated environments, like, say, a young fintech company. There, risk is often just treated as this simple box-checking exercise just to get a license to operate. And the problem there is that there's no real anticipatory power, right? They're just following the rules without a deep awareness of why it actually matters. But as companies grow, formalizing that risk management usually gets triggered by one of three things. Either they experience a nasty negative event, like a bad accident or fraud, they bring in some highly specialized talent, or they suddenly face strict new demands from their shareholders. And it's really at this point that risk management finally has the potential to start adding real, tangible value, rather than just being an annoying auditing chore. Moving right along to Section 2, the optimism trap, let's look at the actual neurological barriers to managing risk. So here is the crucial point. Our failure to manage risk isn't just some corporate oversight. It's actually deeply rooted in our biology. It's a phenomenon called the optimism bias. It's this cognitive illusion researched extensively by neuroscientist Tali Sharot. Her lab found that a staggering 80% of humans have this bias. We just naturally overestimate our chances of experiencing good events, like getting a big promotion, and we severely underestimate our chances of bad events, like getting into a car crash or having a massive project fail. And honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the bias in action. Take marriage, for example. In the Western world, we know the divorce rate is roughly 40%. But if you go and ask newlyweds what their personal chance of divorce is, they almost always say 0%. I mean, even divorce lawyers underestimate their own chances. Like Samuel Johnson famously said, remarriage is the triumph of hope over experience. We just blindly ignore the statistical probabilities when it comes to our own lives. Now you might think, okay, the simple cure is just to artificially lower our expectations. Actually, scratch that. Psychological research shows exactly why that fails. Psychologists Margaret Marshall and John Brown found that people with high expectations just inherently feel better no matter what happens. If they succeed, they attribute it to their own internal genius. If they fail, they just brush it off as a total fluke or an unfair exam. So simply telling your executive team to expect the worst doesn't actually reprogram how they process outcomes. And the biological proof behind all this is just fascinating. Using MRI scans, researchers found that the left side of our brain perfectly processes good news in everybody. But the right side, the part responsible for processing bad news, literally fails to integrate unexpected negative information if you're a highly optimistic person. Your brain's hardware is literally actively filtering out the warning signs. All right, Section 3, integrating risk and strategy. How do we defeat our own biology with proactive planning? The goal here isn't to kill optimism. I mean, optimism is what drives innovation and progress in the first place. Instead, we need to become the penguin with the parachute. Think about it. If you're a purely pessimistic penguin, you'll never take the jump. If you're a blindly optimistic penguin, you jump and, well, you crash. But an optimistic penguin who believes they can fly, yet packs a parachute just in case, that's the sweet spot. We maintain our optimistic vision to soar, but we systematically integrate a plan B to survive the fall. Let's apply this to a real-world scenario straight from our source materials. Consider fashion shoes. They're a 50-year-old Colombian footwear company with their own production facilities and 50 employees in Bogota. They decide to launch a direct-to-consumer e-commerce strategy to reach their customers faster. Obviously, a highly optimistic, high-growth initiative, right? But instead of blindly jumping off the cliff, their new commercial manager acted exactly like our parachute-wearing penguin. Right at the embryonic stage of defining that strategy, long before the website ever launched, he brought in a risk manager. They started asking the tough, proactive questions. What if sales spike and our inventory fails? What if our IT security is breached? What about payment processing errors? By asking these questions early on, they could actually design the strategy to withstand those risks. Let's move to Section 4, Organization-Wide Culture, taking risk beyond the boardroom. Risk management absolutely cannot be confined to the boardroom or just the audit committee. It's a lot like open innovation. Remember how a low-level operator at 3M famously invented the Post-it note? Well, the most critical risks are often spotted by experienced frontline workers too. A machine operator knows that equipment's weird little weaknesses way better than the CEO ever could. We need a massive cultural shift where risk awareness permeates every single level of the company. And internal auditors play a huge, vital role in building this culture, but they have to evolve to do it. They need clear mandates from the board, sure, but more importantly, they must use soft skills and genuine root cause analysis. They've got to move beyond those basic staff surveys, which, let's be honest, usually just tell you what people think you want to hear, and actually evaluate if the organization's daily actions truly align with its stated values. Trust-based relationships are totally key here. Finally, Section 5, Investment in Business Quality. What is the ultimate cost of ignoring all of this? Research from CEB, which was published by the Harvard Business Review, looked at where companies actually lose their market value. We tend to obsess over legal compliance or financial reporting errors, don't we? But the data tells a completely surprising story. Financial reporting causes only 2% of market value loss, legal incompliance, just 3%, operational, 9%. The vast majority of value destruction actually comes from massive, unmitigated strategic risks. Look at this number, 86%. 86% of market value losses stem from strategic failures. And these are failures that could have been identified and mitigated if risk analysis was just integrated into the early, embryonic stages of decision-making rather than being treated as some annoying afterthought. And the stakes here? They are quite literally existential. Over half, 52%, of the companies listed in the S&P 500 index in the year 2000 had completely vanished by 2014. Whether it was through bankruptcy, forced mergers, or just massive loss of value, they disappeared because they failed to adapt and anticipate threats. Their optimism bias won, and they hit the ground without a parachute. I think this quote from Professor Damian Falcone perfectly summarizes our whole explainer today. When you dedicate the time, the training, and the personnel to building a genuinely risk-aware culture, it is never a wasted or unnecessary expense. It is a fundamental protective investment in your organization's overall quality, its agility, and its long-term survival. So, I want to leave you with this final thought. Knowing what you know now about your brain's hardware and how it actively tries to filter out the bad news, how will you change the way your company plans its next big leap? Are you going to strap on the parachute, or will you let the optimism bias lead you right off the edge of the cliff? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this helps you see the fire long before it starts.